Hello and welcome to Life Made Easier podcast. My name is Lesley-Pazdzioch. It's a pleasure to have you join us today. Today I have a very special guest. Her name is Phyllis Leavitt, and she is one of the most fascinating women that I've ever read about, and she's incredibly busy. And this is why. Phyllis graduated with a master's degree in psychology and counseling. She began her career around 1989. And so far, she has actually published two books, A Light in the Dark and Into the Fire, and another one, America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing. As a psychotherapist, she co-directed a sexually abuse treatment program called Parents United in Santa Fe, New Mexico, until around 1991. And she lives currently in Santa or Taos. Tacos? I can't pronounce that right. Huh? Tao?
Oh,
Tao, New Mexico, right now she's focusing on writing her books and such. Welcome to the podcast, Phyllis. Thank you so much for joining me.
well, thank you for having me here with you today, Leslie. I really appreciate the offer, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I am too. So truly, there's a great deal that I really want to discuss during this podcast because some of it hits a little personal for me. And then other parts of it is just fascinating to me about the aspect of your book in regards to America and therapy and such. And so this is really going to be a really great subject. But first, I really want to begin. I'm familiar with the terms counselor and therapist and also having a psychiatrist. But I'm unfamiliar with psychotherapy, with that term psychotherapy. And I know that other people might be as well. So could you just take a few minutes to explain what that is exactly?
Yeah, a psychotherapist really works, at least the way that I was trained and the way that I work. We work to try to heal some of the originating wounds that a person has, or some of the dysfunctional conditioning that they received early in life, especially in their families of origin or their close communities. Um, the dysfunctional messages that we've received that have left us feeling less than or not powerful or unlovable or unworthy or not intelligent, or for some people the message they got was that they were ugly or stupid, or not wanted. We've received Many people have received very negative messages about who they are, and so psychotherapy is really designed to heal the wound that's left from poor conditioning. And it may be from poor role modeling, it may be from being in an unhealthy environment where you weren't wanted, or the limits and boundaries weren't healthy, or there was addiction, or there was overt abuse. Um, and to really, because what we understand in the world of psychotherapy is that we are not what happened to us. There's an essential self inside of a person that remains untouched by anything that's happened to them, or even anything that they've done that's not so great. And that essential self that we were born with has great gifts, it has great capacities, and it has a lot to offer, both in terms of our own inner guidance and our self expression in a healthy way in the world. So basically, psychotherapy peels back the layers of our wounding and our negative beliefs and our dysfunctional coping mechanisms, and helps us access our own real source of love and guidance within. And my experience has been that when people are able to do that, and we don't do it perfectly, sometimes it's two steps forward and one step back, and three steps forward and two steps back. But there's usually a lot of progress if a person sticks with the process. And in that process, we find our own inner guidance and we grow out of therapy. And that's the idea. Just like when you go to a doctor, you're hoping that your body will heal and then you don't go to the doctor anymore. So it's really accessing our own gifts, strengths, and guidance from within that I think the best psychotherapy focuses on.
So what actually inspired you?
Yeah, I mean, like so many people, I went to therapy myself when I was in my 30s, and it was life-changing for me to understand that my early conditioning and some of the trauma in my early childhood really set me up to have some negative coping mechanisms, some poor self-image, some tendencies to withdraw and not really express myself. And the bottom line was it left me with a feeling that I wasn't lovable. And that kind of all came to a head when I was in my 30s. And at that point in my life, people were talking about psychotherapy, which they hadn't when I was young. Um, and I decided to give it a try. And after my first session, I went to the library and took out books on psychology and started reading. And just like a whole new world of self-understanding opened up for me. And eventually I became a psychotherapist myself.
Yeah, that's we're just like somehow this was meant to be because I too, I mean, I had a really hard time, and it was in my life with it, and it was the healing process. And I did the therapy like you did, and I kind of got tired of that blame and shame, right? You either blame somebody or you take responsibility for things that aren't yours, and it just never seemed to me to ever. It would heal one piece of it maybe for a little while, but then something else would come up, and then it would be like then you'd flip it, right? Oh, I really wasn't responsible for that. And, or, it just never seemed, I always felt like I was on the therapy hamster wheel every few years, going back and
Hmm.
forth because there wasn't ever, to me, a final healing, like a final um, resolution
Mm-hmm.
where I was happy that there was never that separation, right? There was never that separation from the problem, from the issue, from the person, from the situation, until I decided, with my own on my own accord to just to look for something different. So that's I think it's really important today that a lot of people, um, especially with the health, the mental health, crisis that we're faced with in America right now. I think that they say what 40, almost 50% of Americans are on some type of prescription antidepressant or anxiety. They're on some sort of medication to regulate their body systems. And then aside from that, we have all of the recreational drugs that are available that people are using. And you can't blame them for looking for relief, right? Because
Right,
otherwise, I think a lot
right.
of people would be taking their lives. And it's something, there were points and times in my life where I just thought, oh, I just can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore because I can't find those answers. And for so many, it's just suppress them, right? Suppress those emotions. So you've written two books. The first one is A Light in the Dark, and Into the Fire. And the other one is American Therapy. This is the one that really, I mean, both of them sound so intriguing to me. It is American Therapy, a new approach to hope and healing for a nation in crisis, which, you know, I really would like to hear about that and how, when you wrote the book, things were at that time. But then now with all these new things coming up in our government system and such, how is that? How is that tying into, or has it changed your perspective since writing the book, or has it confirmed your um, ideas?
Yeah, I think and let me just say, the A Light in the Darkness is a separate book from Into the Fire. Those are two
Yes.
different books. And then American Therapy is the third book. So, but yeah, in terms of America and therapy, I think the basic principles that I talk about in the book are still very alive and, needed and important in the world we live in today. Because I think really what I'm addressing in that book is how do we take an understanding of ourselves, our workings, our reaction patterns, our models for what's appropriate behavior and what's not, what works and what doesn't, how do we approach conflict, how do we settle it. Um, all of those issues that we deal with and that we learn how to deal with in our families of origin and in our immediate communities play out on the larger levels of society. So some people learn to fight, and other people learn to submit, and some people learn to avoid, and some people really learn to sit down and try to mediate conflict and bring people together to compromise and reconnect with one another and cooperate. So we have all different ways of addressing our human relations. We have all different views of men and women. We have all different views of what's right and wrong. And so, we're a very complicated family of America, but I take that model of a family of origin and I look at the family of America through that lens. Are we a healthy family? Are there some parts of our family functioning that are great? And are there other parts that we could really upgrade or that really need to be addressed because they're destructive? Just like you would with a regular family.
So you started to write the book America in Therapy because what made you decide to write that?
Yeah, because I think doing so many years of therapy with so many different family configurations and realizing that most people that came to therapy, in fact, probably 100% of the people that came to therapy that I saw, including myself, were dealing with something dysfunctional in the way they grew up, in the role models that they observed, in the values that they were taught, in the expectations they had, and in particular, the ways that they were taught to handle conflict in personal relationships. And we have so much divisiveness in our country, and we have so many different opinions, and we have a hard time listening to each other. Just the way people, when they're really activated in their own families or their own marriages or their parent-child relationships or their work relationships, sometimes have a really hard time hearing each other and committing to working things out. Instead, what they often do is just try to dominate and get their way and convince people that they're right and that the other person is wrong. And we do that a lot on all levels of human functioning. And the win-lose model of human relations leaves a loser, and a loser often becomes highly symptomatic because they haven't been heard, their needs have not been addressed, and then they often seek to dominate themselves in some other way. So we're really, I think, as a country, as individuals, and as a human race, we're really trying to evolve to a win-win model of human relations. And I think many of the paradigms and the understandings and insights and the tools and strategies of the best psychotherapy are actually geared toward a win-win.
Yeah, I do too. In fact, one of the as I'm building this online learning system and learning website, one of my ultimate goal is to have one of the largest online um, membership areas for people around the world that have so many, that we all have differences, right? I mean, no two people are the same. And I've, and as I went through my process of healing and trying to figure out who I am and why I'm here, and then healing the things that happened to me. I first had to figure out who I was. Then I kind of intermittently why I was here, but now more so like why I was here. And then now it's like, okay, how can you teach this to people? Because one of the things that I learned for me that was really crucial, and it ties into this, is if I can find somebody that has the same core values, meaning morals, values, principles, ethics, standards, but there's other aspects that we're not all going to agree on, right? But if you can look at those differences and say, are these differences? How can I add value to myself from these differences? It's either going to solidify who you already are, it's going to add value to who you are, or it's going to, by, taking, expanding your viewpoints, or it's going to confirm where you are within yourself and say, I'm going to respect that person from where they are because I want to be respected from where I am. But they just confirmed to me. This is another, this is a time when you can sit and say, I'm glad that we have these differences because it made me inside realize I'm okay, and you are too. We're different in these areas, and I'm going to celebrate you, and I'm going to celebrate myself because it just proves that I'm an individual and I'm here to do my own thing and I'm here to not conform. So much of life now is, conform to certain things with all these, the latest trends and such. And that I've never been trendy. And it's never been one of those trend people. I've always just kind of done my own thing. I don't know. But I see where you're coming from. And I think that is going to be a huge part of what's happening in the world and in the paradigm shifts that are happening spiritually. That's another, we can talk about that on a different podcast. And so when I think about things, why do you think our individual and collective mental health is so important today as opposed to um, generations before?
Well, I think it's always been important, but we actually didn't. I mean, the field of psychology is relatively new. And, I think in many ways, the win-lose paradigm was just how human beings survive. We're animals. Animals, have to conquer other animals to eat or eat a plant. And that plant doesn't survive because it's fed the animal that ate it, or the zebra doesn't survive because the lion had to eat it to feed its cubs or whatever. And we're animals. And so, but what makes us really different from other animals is that we eat on many levels. We eat emotional food from each other. We eat mental food, and we serve emotional and mental food to each other, what we call spiritual or religious food to each other. So it's not just in the physical realm. We are very complex beings. And again, for the most part, domination and submission. I conquer you. You have to abide by my laws or adopt my religion or eat the kind of foods that I tell you are the right foods to eat or dress the way I tell you to dress or whatever. That's just kind of been the history of mankind. And I think that in the process of being those kinds of multi-level consumers and feeders of one another, that we've created wonderful things, beautiful art, amazing sciences, music, dance, the visual arts, architecture. And we've created philosophies, and we've created different methods of agriculture and, healing, and a million things that we're so creative as human beings. And we've created many ways to destroy each other. Weapons, and ideologies that are filled with hatred or discrimination or ostracizing certain people or murdering them. We've created war as well. So I think we have to look at ourselves as both highly creative and also very destructive. And I think that's just in the nature of being a human being. And I think that we are at a turning point. This is my view from my work and my observation of what's going on in the world. I think we're at a turning point as the human race. And the reason why I say that is because right now, and this wasn't true, 100 years ago or 200 years ago, we have the power with the weapons that we have built to dominate and conquer each other. We have the power to wipe out life on this earth. So the stakes of our destructive impulses are high in a way that they've never been before, at least in my understanding of human history.
I agree.
And that changes everything. That changes everything. And so we have to now look at this win-lose paradigm and let ourselves know, no blame. This is where we've evolved to. There's been some good that's come out of it, and there's some real destruction that's come out of it. What do we choose now for our future, for our children, for our grandchildren, for the viability of the planet itself? If we continue to cut down the rainforest and pollute the water and, put chemicals that are poisonous into the soil and into our food, we have a choice point to make here. And I believe that that is a mental health issue. And the reason why I say that, and it's been made into an ideological issue and a partisan issue and a political issue, but the reason why I frame it as a mental health issue is because mentally healthy people don't want to hurt other people. They want to cooperate. They want to get along. They want to do exactly what you just described, which is honor our differences, and maybe even learn from our differences. That's what mentally healthy people do. Mentally healthy people have good boundaries. This is where I end and you begin. I don't take up all the space. I don't know everything. I may have things to learn from you. You may have a contribution to me or to all humankind that is very valuable. It's not my contribution because I'm a different person with a different skill. So I think we really need to have a new context for human relations that is cooperative, that is honoring, that is respectful, and most of all, because none of that happens without a commitment to nonviolence. Because if you're not safe, you can't cooperate in those kinds of ways or really honor each other because you're on survival.
I have to tell you, you're speaking to my soul because I've been saying for the past for the past 5 years, I would say, many times, even through my social media accounts, I truly believe that, and I'm going to bring spirituality into our conversation because that's important to me, and I know that it's important to you as well. On a, and this can this kind of brings both of them together, and truly I believe that when you were saying, we have all this stuff where we can like destroy ourselves, and I think we were at that point. I think that a lot of people that were paying attention realized that we were at that point. I think it was probably 10 years ago that it was really, really like serious, right? 8 to 10 years ago. And I believe that as a collective consciousness, we asked for a second chance. I believe humanity asked for a second chance. There's nothing there's nobody that will ever tell me any different. I know that we asked for a second chance. And I know that God is, or the Holy Divine, however you look at it, I look at it as God and divinity, or what He created around Him to assist Him. But so when I say Holy Divinity, I don't mean God, because God is separate from divinity. Divinity to me is the angels. It's the divine aspects of God, right, that surround Him. But I truly believe that we asked for a second chance, but we needed His help, and we've always needed His help. Humanity's always needed the help of the divine interventions, right? But I don't think humanity ever understood that it was an option. I know that for me as a Catholic, I'll use that as an example. Growing up, it was like it was always guilt and shame and blame and I just feel like crap, right? But there was we have this guidance that's available to us, but nobody ever explained that to me except in prayer. But we can actually, on a daily basis, communicate, and they can guide us. And that is one of the things that I learned over the past 8 years, is that they actually guide us. And that's always been available to us. But I don't think humanity was at a point that they could accept this aspect, right? And it took, I believe, the scientific aspects of manifestation, and then the Eastern beliefs of meditation, and when you start combining all this stuff, it opens up a whole new world, right? It just opens up a whole new world. But I believe in order to truly access that gift, in fact, I know it didn't happen for me, and it happened by chance. It was still to this day. It took me like 18 months to really let it sink in that I had this ability, And then I found other people that do, and I was like blown away by it, right? I just didn't even know it was an option. But I do think that a, a there's a new shift in all of this, and we have all this upheaval coming up. Like, you gotta stir stuff, right? You gotta kind of get in there and clean it out. And I think that's really what's happening, especially in the government. I mean, the United States government is triggering a lot of things in other countries and their governmental structures as well. So I know that there's a lot going on in the world, but I just look at it as it's really a good thing, and I think it's truly um, it's divine intervention, and I can't even explain to you how grateful I am, because we could have and we could have just destroyed ourselves as a human race, it was there. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that, I think we are at a choice point about just because we can, let's say, build a huge nuclear weapon, should we? Just
Right.
because we can use it, should we do that? And I think we really have to decide that because, and again, from a psychological point of view, we're looking at suicide, homicide on a mass scale. And when a person is suicidal or homicidal, we say they need help. We try to talk them off the ledge. We try to help them put the gun down and deal with their pain or their anger or their fear or their disappointment, or their blame and shame of other people or their victimization or whatever has happened to them that's gotten them to the point of being homicidal and suicidal. So could we look at ourselves seamlessly and with love as a human race or as a country and say, let's get off this ledge. And what do we need to do that? And what is the underlying pain that's causing so much violence or hatred or discrimination, or desire to act out on other people? Because we could take ourselves out in the process. So for me, it's a very psychological process. We know how to talk to people when they're in that much pain or that much rage or that much desire to inflict harm on other people because of their own pain and anger. And could we have that conversation with ourselves, and really put our weapons down and come back to the table? You know, for so many people, what leads them to the point of some kind of destructive behavior, whether it's overtly homicidal or suicidal, or ODing or taking drugs or becoming aggressive toward other people or robbing or sexually assaulting other people or whatever it is we do when we're really, really mentally unwell within ourselves, is we look for the source of the pain and we try to address it and heal it if possible. And from our work in psychology and psychotherapy with individuals, we know that that can be addressed. We know that someone who has been suicidal can come back and be glad to have their life and start their life anew. And we've read stories, most of us have read stories about people, for instance, who either had made a suicide attempt and it wasn't successful, and then they came back and they had a totally new take on life, um, kind of thing. So I think we have to look at the extreme and then come back to the personal. What is causing the average person? You brought up the point that so much of the population is on some kind of medication to help manage their nervous system or their depression or their anxiety. Um, what's causing that? And for me, what I look at in my book and what I've found as a psychotherapist is that it's both what may have happened in the family and what's happening in the larger family system that's hurting people, and that they feel powerless to change or escape or heal from.
And this is where you talk about, the importance of understanding the family systems and the family dynamics when we're talking about the political, um,
Right.
politics and culture. This is where you're that explains it. You know, another question I have is, what happens when dysfunctional behavior goes untreated? And why is that information of a national concern? And now that I think about it, I'll let you answer, but I think we've already answered the question because go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think we've talked a little bit about it, and there's a little bit more that we could say. And and I have several chapters in my book that are devoted to this in detail, with lots of case study examples and some of the psychological understandings and observations that I've made over many years as a psychotherapist. But basically, what happens when a person is not loved well and they're not safe, when they're hurt by other human beings, whether they receive negative messages about themselves, or they're shamed and blamed, or they're ostracized, or they're given really, critical messages like you're stupid, or you're fat, or you're ugly, or you're worthless, or any of those things.
You just explained my childhood. You
Yeah,
just
and
totally explained my childhood.
many people's childhood, and more people than we'd like to know,
And
really.
I never understood that when I was younger, but now that I'm older, I'm seeing it more and more. It's more and more apparent to me. And it hasn't been, it never really was until I hit the age 50. When I now from 50 now, probably because I'm almost 58, but over the past 8 years, I can say it now. I am more aware that it wasn't like, I mean, when you talk about a black sheep of a family, I mean, I felt like the black sheep of the farm, right? That the entire Western United States black sheep, right? Like I was this rare species, but now that I'm older, it's like they just didn't talk about it then. We
Right.
just accepted it. We just accepted that
Totally.
that's what it was.
Totally. Totally. I mean, we didn't even have the language for it when I grew up. So, but basically, what I was saying is that when you're hurt by other people, whether it's the emotional messaging you're getting or you're actually taught things that aren't true, some people hear things like, your family are the only people that will ever love you. Nobody in the outside world is safe. Don't trust anyone. These things are not true. But if you hear them as a child, you believe them because you don't have anything to bounce them off of. And all the way to physical violence and physical abuse and sexual assault, and being, like kicked out, thrown out, ostracized, abandoned. Um, there's all kinds of ways that people hurt other people. We have a variety of symptoms. Our little psyches, when we're children, can't process that kind of abuse and neglect. And so we have to form some kind of a defense. We have to form some kind of survival mechanism. Um, in addition to the fact that we've taken on very negative beliefs about ourselves that aren't true, but they're running the show. And out of those negative beliefs that we've taken on, we decide how we're going to survive. One person withdraws. Another person becomes really aggressive and is a bully on the playground or keeps beating up their siblings. Another person, demonstrates their pain by failure to thrive. They're not learning in school. They're always in trouble. They're talking out of turn in class. Another child survives by becoming obsessed, where they pick at their skin, or they're imagining something that they have to go lock all the doors of the house because they're afraid, and they have to do that over and over again, or they wash their hands a million times to get the germs off, and that makes them feel like they're in control of something that really is out of control for them. Or they become people pleasers, or they become overachievers. Or they are early on addicts, or they get in with the wrong crowd, or they keep attracting themselves to people who continue to hurt them. There's so many
Again,
symptoms.
Phyllis, you you're like,
Right.
I mean, this is like the blueprint of my life. Like, I mean, everything you're saying, I'm like, oh my gosh, where were you? Where were, you know?
Right.
It's,
Right.
yes, it's like, yeah, I'm, oh,
And I think for many people, you're not alone. I'm in that group with you. Most people I know have some version of that story. It's the rare person I meet that really had a childhood where they felt totally safe, where they felt really loved, where they felt valued for who they were, where they were encouraged in their individual strengths and gifts, um, and had really great role models for conflict resolution. I haven't actually met anybody who had all of that. So we have a long way to go in our individual families and in the family of America. But so you asked me what some of the symptoms were, and there's two that I really want to highlight because I think all of those are very important.
before you answer
Um,
that, I just
sure,
want to add this
sure.
to it. You know, I think one of the things that I think would be important to address is if we look back in the 40s, the 50s, you know, and even further back, and even in society today, we put so much value verbally, like on the importance of family, which I'm not saying, which I agree, family is very important, right? Family is very important. Um, because it gives us our structure and our foundation, whatever it turns out to be, right? Then we have the holidays, and I think that you have to spend the holidays with your family, and during these times, because of the social ideals and views of what these gatherings or these celebrations are supposed to be, the ideal, right? The ideal, like the ideal family, the ideal celebrations, the Hallmark movie, um, the lifestyle or situations. I think they do happen for some people, but I think for the people that they don't. But then you hear about the stories of, oh my God, Uncle, Henry's going to be there, and Aunt so and so, and then they, it just goes off, and it's like, well, they got drunk again, or whatever happens, right? There's so much dysfunction, but is it dysfunction? I mean, we look at it as dysfunction, but sometimes that's like human behavior, right? I mean, people are going to have their moods and go up and down, and maybe Aunt Phyllis had an up and down moment during dinner, or or I don't mean to say Phyllis because your name's Phyllis, but I mean maybe Aunt Sue did, right? But is it that we're expecting this ideal Hallmark situation when in reality we could just be saying, okay, this is typical, normal, everyday stuff that people go through. They go through emotional stuff. They have moments where they don't know what to do, or they act inappropriate, or they overspeak, or over whatever. Isn't that accepting that this is how people are, who they are, and it's going to happen even during the holidays? It's going to happen in your family, it's going to happen in life. And just to really use that as, when we experience these things when we were younger, we can look at them and say, is this something, a behavior or a characteristic that I am willing to take and utilize in my life going forward, or is this something that I can learn from that I don't want to be? Because one of my greatest sayings that I even told my kids as I was raising them, because I was a single parent, I said, some of the greatest teachers in the world are going to teach you what you don't want to be.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's room for all of what you said. First of all, nobody is going to be Father Knows Best. We're just not going to be this ideal family where the kitchen's always clean and mom and dad always get along and the dog never barks and all the kids get along and they never fight. Nobody is going to be that. That's not human nature to be that. So yes, we don't want to put some strange ideal or idealized image what a family is supposed to be or what an individual is supposed to be on ourselves. But I think where we need to make some distinctions is, maybe Uncle Henry got drunk and he always does that, and it's sort of annoying. And that's just what Uncle Henry does, and we can accept it. Or does Uncle Henry get drunk and then try to molest somebody?
Right.
So I think we really have to look at some of our quirks and our foibles and our less than perfect behaviors actually hurting somebody or destroying the family structure, or are they just part of being a human being? And I think we just have to decide that for ourselves. How much is normal? How much is totally acceptable? How much do I do that's not perfect? And how much do I or other people do that actually hurts someone or violates their space or leaves them feeling less than or not wanted? So I think it's really a matter of discernment of, because I would say that in a relationship, in a healthy relationship, let's just say between a man and a woman, let's just use that as an example. We're going to trigger each other. Sometimes we're not going to see eye to eye. We might be really hurt or angry with each other. But if the container of the relationship is safe, and I know you're never going to hit me or scream obscenities at me, you can be upset with me, but there's going to be a limit around your expression of that, and your goal is to work it out with me. If those kinds of being imperfect and human are within a safe container where we know we're safe and we know we're loved, then yeah. But if we're not, then we're in a dysfunctional situation that can really cause harm and harm our children if they're witnessing it.
I completely agree. I think that the first example that you give, to have a safe container where you can be who you are, and it's okay to make mistakes. I think that is where I think we're going to start moving into that in a social structure when this is all done. I think it's going to take probably 10 years or so, but I think that's true. I think that if people could get to the point where they're going to say, they're not going to be perfect because I'm not perfect. I'm not going to expect perfection out of them, but I'm going to provide this safe container so that we can go ahead and be as imperfectly perfect.
Right.
And then from that imperfection and from my mistakes with this person, I'm going to learn how to give forgiveness to them and to myself. I'm going to learn more about myself, and I know they're not going to judge me. I know they're not going to hold it against me. I know that they're going to love me anyway. I know that I'm going to hurt people, and people are going to hurt me. But I also know that in a healthy container, we can have those differences that are necessary for our individual growth, right? And it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
That's right. And that exact model that you just described and that we've been talking about is what I would love to see the family of America become.
I think we're headed there.
I really hope so, because I feel like that's what we desperately need, is to have a social political structure that allows us to be human, allows us to make mistakes, where we don't vilify each other, where we're accountable for our own behavior, and we hold others accountable for their behavior, but it's not based in hatred, and it's not based in discrimination, and it's not based in ostracizing anyone. And one of the elements of that in a healthy relationship, which a lot of people never learn, I never saw this role modeled in my home. And I think there's a lot of people who never saw this role modeled in their homes or maybe anywhere else. And that is the ability to say, I'm sorry. I hurt you. What I said was unkind, or I really had a very critical tone of voice, or I've misjudged you. or, whatever I did, I want to be accountable for that to you. I want to make amends with you so that you know that I am being responsible and I don't want to repeat the way that I've hurt you. I think it's one of the ways that's really missing when we talk about love, because it's a really loving thing to do for another human being, is to really own our own part in whatever went down that wasn't good. And I know that for me, when I've been the one to apologize or I've been the one to receive an apology, it just clears the air of the relationship and it brings us back into loving connection.
I think it's interesting that you say that too. Again, you're just like mirroring me. I there's certain things that will happen, and I'll either say something or I'll do something out of just reaction, right?
Right.
And my whole healing process, I went through a God hit the reset button on every aspect of my life, and I had to start all over again. And part of that process was that I learned from it is that regardless of when it happened or how it happened, but I really started when things would come up in my mind from the past, I would deal with just that, and I call this healing forward. Um, but I always look at something, and if something rolls around my head and I don't feel good about it, right? I'll
Mm-hmm.
I'll actually go to that person and I'll apologize. And so many times people will look at me with their twisted, like their heads twisted. It's like, Lesley, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'd have to say, you know what? That's okay. You don't have
Mm-hmm.
to know what I'm talking about. I have to know what I'm talking about.
Right.
Or they'll say sometimes they'll just think it's just weird that I've done that, right? I would just say, hey, you know what? This happened and I'm sorry. And that's just how I am. Because to me, for me in my life now, going forward and over the past 8 years, and I know that it's just going to get better and better as I go forward. One of the things that I made this commitment because I didn't know God um, in my first 40 years, and He and I had a holy war when He hit the reset button on my life because I didn't realize it was Him doing me a favor at the time, right? Um, and it was like a Hiroshima bomb just like went off and everything was destroyed. And I was pissed. But then I realize now that he was doing me a favor by hitting that reset button. But from that moment, um, I decided the way I was going to go forward and live my life, and I was going to always be purity of heart, mind, and soul. Right? I didn't want to have things left undone or unsaid. So when something from my past comes up, like I remember one time, I had taken some of my sister's shoes, and she had come to where I was to pick them, to look for them. I mean, I knew, like my intuition told me, right? And I lied to her. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, it was like 5 years ago or so. She was here visiting, and I said to her, Wendy, remember when this happened? She kind of, I don't think she remembered, and I said, well, that's all right. I just need you to know that I lied to you, and I'm sorry. I mean, I did stuff like this from the, when that reset button was hit, and during my healing process, I went to people and I said, I'm sorry for this, I'm sorry for that. I apologized for things, right? But what I also did is I confronted people and I said, this has happened and it was wrong. It was wrong. I should have never had to experience this. Um, but I forgave you, but I forgive you. And I forgive you not, and I forgave them not because of them, and I didn't apologize for them. This was all about me
Right.
because the people that I apologized to, they just could care less, and they might be holding on to things that I'm not aware of, right? Or the people that hurt me intentionally, they just don't care. But what the whole point for me is that I took accountability and responsibility for myself, right? I knew what was right and what was wrong for me. So when people start coming up and apologizing, I know it's going to be a huge thing soon, that people are really going to start mending these relationships and making peace with it. To me, it was making peace within myself, and I know that was probably a, the main key, right? Because I had to forgive. I remember in therapy, my therapist said, Lesley, just write 2 letters and of apology or confront this person in whatever you need to do, and I'll see you next week. Well, next week I had 16 of them, and she said, well, I said, here's your copy, Lesley. Her name was Lesley too, spelled I-E. Um, I said, I handed her a folder. I said, here's your copies. And she goes, my copies? And I said, yeah. And she goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, I made 3 copies, one for me, one for you, and I mailed the rest of them. She said, you did what? I said, I mailed them. I stuck them in the mail and I mailed them. And she said, what about the people that were passed away? And I said, honestly, Lesley, I sent them to the mortician. I sent them to the mortuary. I did. I said, in care of, to the person and in care of. I don't care. I mean, I don't know if the mortician people read it or not, but hopefully I started a movement there. But it was my way of making that peace that we were talking about in the beginning, where you blame or you take you blame others, or you take responsibility for things that aren't yours, but it just doesn't make it, it doesn't, it doesn't bring it any resolution when you do that.
Well, I love what you just shared because I think what you're really talking about is being true to yourself and living in your highest version of your integrity. And I don't think there's anything better than that. We just keep striving to live in our own integrity. And I love the 2 pieces that you exemplified in what you shared, which is that I really apologized to people that I had hurt, and I worked on my own self and my own wounds because they're both part of it, and and they belong together because there's not one of us who hasn't hurt somebody else. Even if we never meant to, we just do because we're human and we don't see everything, and sometimes we don't care about our impact because we're just reacting, like you said. So for me, there's integrity in all of that. And I believe that they really go together. And I think when people really, and I've had people spontaneously experience this in therapy, where they're working on a childhood wound, where they were left out, or they felt like the kid that nobody picked for the baseball team, or they didn't have enough friends, or whatever. And then they're in the middle of processing the pain that they felt as a child from feeling left out and not belonging. And then all of a sudden they flash on somebody that they left out and didn't include, because that's what healing does.
That's exactly what it did. I think that when I made that as I started that process, it made it so that I stuck up for myself, because I was always the one taking responsibility for stuff that wasn't mine. But when I
Right.
stuck up for myself, right, it made a difference. And then I started seeing the balance, where I started creating that balance of, okay, when I act like this towards somebody else, they're feeling like this because I felt it before, and because I don't want to feel that, right? I don't like the way this feels when somebody blatantly criticizes me, or blatantly brings harm to me, or cheats me, or lies to me, or mistreats me. Therefore, and that's what got me, because it was that 360 perspective from the within. And I love when you say this, the essential self. When you go within that essential self, these things are just, then you just know. But the more this takes place in my life, I can say the more sensitive I've become, the more self-aware I've become, but also I'm much more wise, and I can see things in others that behavior such, right? I can see things in others that I understand why they act the way they do, why they're lashing out, why they're doing this, why they're doing that, because I've processed that stuff on both sides within myself, and I've become consciously aware of it happening.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight something else that you said that I thought was really important, and that is that there's a place, there's obviously a place to make amends and do your own apologizing, and there's a place to stand up for something.
Right.
And I think the key was when we really feel like there's something that we need to advocate for or stand up for, or not accept as a blame or shame or something like that, that it's really important how we do it. That we're standing up without inflicting some kind of verbal, emotional, or other kinds of violence, like intense criticism on other people. And I think that's a real skill and I think that's one of the things that psychology helps us learn. You can learn it in mediation. You can learn it from getting in touch with your most essential self, which doesn't do harm. But I think there's a place for power, a powerful stand for what feels like truth or authenticity or goodness or, being, a kind, loving human being. There's a place to make a stand for that without doing harm. And I think that's what we're learning as a human race.
I do too. I look at, I'm just going to use President Trump for an example. I mean, I love the guy. I think that he's doing a lot of really great things, right? Um, but one of the things that I see is that, and I know why he's doing it. I mean, he's got to be, I mean, to me, he's a decent person. I mean, and I'm okay to say that. But the one aspect about him is that he's starting to criticize, he'll criticize other people, right? And I know why he's doing it, because he's taken so much criticism within himself, towards himself, that he's just putting it back out there. But for me, it was when I had that criticism or that treatment that I knew because of the, I knew because I had processed these things and found that 50-yard line. I knew what it felt like to receive it, right? And because I knew what it felt like to receive it, I never wanted to put it out. So one of the key things is like, okay, Lesley, you don't want to put it out there, but you've got this shit stirring inside of you like a volcano. What are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with those emotions that are bubbling up inside of you? Because you can't smash it down. For the first 40
Right.
years, it was like a trash compactor, right? You just keep smashing down, and then all of a sudden,
You
probably the
explode.
smallest thing, you just explode, you know?
Right.
And I think that's where people get to the point where they take their own life, and they take other people's lives, and they act out, and that's where it comes from. But for me, it was that process of, I know what that feels like. I'm not going to do that to another person, but I'm not going to hold it in and smash it down. I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, what can I learn about me? What can I learn from this that's going to make me better?
Yeah.
Right. So I
And
always
it's
say,
beautiful.
how can I use this to become, because I love this saying about, you know, when you take an expensive or an experience and say, what can I do to make me better, not bitter? Make yourself better, not bitter. Because I got really, I mean, I was the giver. I was the giver, and this smashed down my feelings, and God hit that reset button, and I lost. I lost. I shouldn't even be here because it was so severe when he hit that reset button. Mentally and emotionally, I just melted down like a 5-year-old, and they didn't think I was going to survive it, but I did, and I think that I did because of, we all have a purpose in this life, and the things that I've learned since then, I hopefully can create something that makes it so that other people learn the tools that I did. Like they can put these techniques into their life and
Right.
make it better, because it truly does make a huge difference.
And I think that's a good learning, and that's one of the learnings that I think comes out of really working on ourselves and healing our own wounds is that we don't want to do to other people what some of the things were that were done to us or that we know feel really bad. We
Yeah.
just really don't want to do them. And if we do unconsciously act some of that out, we apologize and we make amends and we come back to center after that. And so I think that's a beautiful example of really learning from your own experience and your own mistakes.
I like that way that you put that, because it's true. I've learned that when I would find that resolution and I would become better, not bitter, so many things from the past, it would be like a domino effect, and then I could feel these dominoes of things that would have been swirling around within my head. They all seem like this line of it seemed to be healed, right? All those situations were all healed because now I understood. I had a greater understanding within myself. But then there's going to be other things attached to it, and that's okay, because the next time something related to that. But it seems like slowly but surely they're all that stuff is going away, and it just leaves you. It leaves me in a place of sheer gratitude, right? It's humbling, and I have gratitude, and I think I'm a more mature person,
Right.
a lot more mature person. So I want to now ask you about your other book, A Light in the Darkness into the Fire, because I think that really can relate to what we're talking about.
Well, those two books, The Light in the Darkness is the first one I wrote, and then I wrote Into the Fire after that. And they really chronicle my own healing journey partly from a psychological point of view, but
are they 3 books?
There's 3 books.
Oh, I thought there were 2.
Yeah, A Light in the Darkness is a separate book from Into the Fire.
Oh, okay.
Those are 2 different books, and they're Into the Fire kind of follows where A Light in the Darkness leaves off. So it's a continuation of what's in A Light in the Darkness. So the first part of A Light in the Darkness is very autobiographical. It's some of what I experienced as a child and growing up, and what brought me to the point where I really knew that I needed to heal in a really big way. And that basically happened. I had 3 small children. I was in my 30s, and my life was just falling apart. And and I was starting to have memories of some of the trauma in my childhood that I had buried. So it was a really intense time in my life.
Were your kids about the same age that it happened to you?
Well, I had 3 children at the time. So my youngest was, when I first started having memories, he was no more than 2. And then I had, my daughter was 5 years older, and my oldest son was a year and a half older than her. So 2, 7, and 8.5, or something like that they were. And my earliest memories were actually even younger than that. My earliest memories were really from infancy, and then I had some memories from when I was a very young teenager of a different layer of trauma that happened to me. So, but all of it was buried until it was kind of like my marriage falling apart was the trigger for it to all fall apart. And which happens to a lot of people, I think, that one trauma unearths the rest of the traumas. And it's not true for everyone, but it was certainly true for me, and it's been true for many people that I've worked with.
It was true for me.
Yeah. And it was very, very painful, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I began to understand why I was stuck the way I was, why I was attracted to the people that I was attracted to, why I felt so shut down and unable to be my full self, um, and why I felt so unlovable and unworthy of love, which is really how I felt at that time. So the beginning of A Light in the Darkness is just kind of what led up to me going to therapy and starting to remember. But yeah, and I've said this a million times, along the way, since early childhood, I also had very spiritual experiences that would just kind of come out of nowhere. And and they were experiences of deep divine love just filling me and feeling like I was a part of something so divinely loving and so wise and so completely forgiving and non-judgmental. Non-judgment wasn't ever there. Um, and those kind of two worlds came together for me at that time. So my spiritual connection just exploded during my process of recovering, and being in therapy and going to therapy and remembering what happened to me. I was always a writer. I was writing in my journal, and I began to receive a lot of direct guidance through my journal writing that really was not coming from anything I had ever learned anywhere. And so that's what those two books are about. And I share some of those original messages that were just all of it together. The healing from the abuse that happened and the opening to a greater source of love and wisdom, they kind of dovetailed. And eventually, I began to come out of that a different person. And it was a journey. And it was sometimes a scary journey, sometimes a painful journey. But I was sharing this with somebody yesterday, and I want to repeat it here because it's so true for me, and I wonder if it's true for you, and it might be true for some of your listeners. I went to every session. I never missed a session. Sometimes I did extra sessions. Some of those sessions were excruciatingly painful when I remembered things that happened to me that were just overwhelming. And I always wanted to go because as difficult as some of that material was to process and feel and work through, I was addicted to knowing the truth about myself. And addicted is probably not a good word, but
Oh, that's a
knowing
good
that
word. You were just, yeah. What an
knowing
addiction.
knowing the truth was the North Star. I would do anything to keep uncovering the truth and feel and unbury that essential self that I always was. And that's what that process was for me.
Yeah, I can say that when my marriage fell apart, my husband, I married a man that was an alcoholic, just like the family that I grew up in. And then I kept the kids. I had the kids, and I could keep control of everything in my life except for what he did, right? That
Which
I
was a
wasn't
lot.
responsible for, right? I couldn't make him come home at night. I couldn't stop him from seeing other women. I couldn't, drag him home, right? But I could control everything else in my world and in my environment. And it was one day he pulled up in front of our house. He had taken my kids to a barbecue at a coworker's house. And when he came home, he pulled up in front of the house and he was drunk. And he had all three of my kids in that car. And that was the day that I said, I'm done. You can do whatever you want with your life and your physical body. But when you, these kids don't have a choice, right? But I'd already lost a child. My second child had passed to crib death, which is something totally out of my control, totally unknown how it happens. But when that happened, it triggered something in me, and I was just like, no. I was just like furious. It was a fight within me that was like, never again will anybody harm these kids. But then I noticed I had a boy, a girl, a boy, a girl, a boy, but most my second son, um, whom God is caring for and holding dear for me um, till I can. Um, But I noticed when as my kids got older, my girls especially, because then I had the two girls and my son. It's when my girls were getting older that it started triggering the memories of the abuse that I suffered, and mine was the ones that it was triggering for me was sexual abuse. I had the neglect and the verbal abuse and such that you get from the alcoholic family, but it was the
Right.
sexual abuse that
Mhm.
and I would look at my girls and I would just that I think because watching them at those ages and seeing the things that were going around and being so protective and knowing that I couldn't um, save them, from the world. But as they started to get older, I started noticing things, and that's when I think my stuff started coming out within me. I think that had a
Yeah.
lot to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds like you have the same thing.
Very similar. Very,
But it
very
was
similar.
interesting. Everybody that I've talked to, and I don't know about you, but it seems that the 40 seems to be the golden age.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about right around 40 when we're all supposed to be having midlife crisis and buying sports cars, right? And maybe this is the new midlife crisis for our generation, but it's like everybody that I've talked to that has these beautiful stories to share, like you and I are sharing now, they're always in their 40s. In
Mhm.
their 40s. Do you find that to be like the
You
golden
know,
age?
well, it's an interesting observation. I never made that observation, but it could very well be true. It certainly was true for me. That I had my third child when I was 35, and so toward the end of my 30s, and when I hit 40, um, I was in it. I was deep in the healing world, and it was hugely transitional. It wasn't sports cars and that kind of midlife crisis. It was a midlife healing crisis,
Yeah,
which I would say I'm just forever grateful for. You know, the pain was nothing compared to redemption.
right, right. Yeah, I totally agree. It was I didn't buy a sports car. I paid a therapist, and then
Right.
I just the thing that triggered my journey was well, after God hit that reset button and my husband asked me for a divorce at the same time, well, right after that, um, my therapist that started this whole who am I, why am I here journey is uh, at the very beginning of trying to figure out what happened. My therapist, Leslie, asked me, she said, Leslie, who are you? And I said, what? She said, who are you? And I was so excited and I started explaining to her about my job and my business and my kids and da 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 da. And when I was all done, my new marriage and da da da, she looked at me, she goes, well, those are nice attributes about your life, Leslie, but who are you? And I said, that is me. And she said, no, that isn't you. Look within. And I said, look within what? She said, look within you. And when she explained to me what what it meant to be looking within, it scared me, like unbelievably scared me, because I had no idea what she was talking about. I'd never, nobody had, growing up or anything, nobody ever said, this is what it's about as we raise our children. This is about letting them identify who they are, right? They have to know that these certain characteristics about, you know, the who they are, like they're masculine, feminine, what does that really mean? And it took me 10 years. And it was probably the whole process, the whole last 17 years. I would, if somebody said, Leslie, if you had to do it over again, would you? And I'd say, absolutely. I just want to take what I know now because my
Right.
17
Right.
years would be like way combined.
Right.
God
Right.
knows what he's
Right.
doing when he does this to us. I have a couple more questions if you don't mind.
No, it's good.
Um, I wrote them down. Okay, I want to talk about your co-directing at the sexual abuse and treatment program um, called Parents
Parents
United.
United, yeah.
One of the things that,
Mhm.
before I forget this question, because I didn't actually write this question down, is, I know that you worked in this area. Um, did you ever find instances where the victim wasn't acknowledged, or as a child, right? That everybody knew it happened, but that victim, but nobody took responsibility or um, helped that person? Or is that something that you found more um, when they were adults? Did that make sense?
So are you saying that there were people whose history was that the people around them when they were a child knew they were being molested, but they didn't acknowledge it or help them?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've heard every story imaginable. For some people it was they knew, the parents knew, or somebody knew. For other people, nobody knew because, it happened in secret and they were too afraid to tell. Um, for other people, they finally told and they were or were not believed. I had a client who finally told his parents. He was in his either in his 30s or 40s, and he finally told his parents that a family member had molested him quite often during his childhood, and they continued to invite that family member to their home. They just didn't want to deal. Um, I've, so I think particularly with, well, I don't know if it's different with sexual abuse and physical abuse, but with sexual abuse, there's just a wall of denial that really surrounds that issue for many, many people. They just don't want to know. Um, I had a very interesting story of someone who called the agency when I was working there, and I answered the phone and she wanted to come in. So our program, we had groups for everybody. We had groups for children who had been molested. We had groups for their siblings who were affected by the molest but weren't the victim of the molest. We had all ages of kids. We had groups for the perpetrator who were court ordered, and we had groups for the parents. Like often it was often the mother, not always, but often the mother who wasn't the perpetrator, but who was married to the person who did molest the children. And we had groups for adult survivors of sexual abuse. So we had the whole gamut. And I got a call from someone who said that her adult daughter, had finally told her that her father, who was deceased, had molested her throughout childhood, and she wanted help. She was devastated um, by what her daughter told her, and she really wanted help. And I invited her to come to the group for what we called non-offending parents. The next day, she called back, and she was in a rage. And she said, "I'm not coming. My daughter's crazy. She made this all up, and I never want to talk to her again." So she went from trying to digest the information about her husband who had passed away to complete denial. And that's not unusual. People, it's very hard to digest. I'm not saying her reaction was a good one, because obviously it wasn't healthy, but it was the level of distress and pain and fear and shame that it brought up in her that she couldn't tolerate. And I think that's not uncommon.
Oh, what do you think? And it's like, how could you mentally wrap your head around that? Um, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I think it's the same courage that it takes to mentally wrap your head around what happened to you.
Right.
It's like facing the truth, because facing the truth is what sets us free.
Yeah, because I think that in order for, if I put myself in that position, I'd have to think, um, she was blaming herself. Why didn't I see it? How could this be real? But she wasn't. She it just, yeah. I mean, we can't even go down that road because that's not
Right.
good. So, do you think that this, working with these people and working in this facility, do you think that's what triggered you to go into working with people that were sexually abused and working with families in your private practice? Or before you started, was that an area you wanted to go into already?
I wasn't necessarily that I wanted to go into that area. It was more that once I became a therapist, and I had done a lot of therapy myself and continued to do therapy myself for quite a while. But once I became a therapist, what I found is that that's what people were dealing with. They were dealing with sexual abuse. They were dealing with physical violence. They were dealing with emotional violence. They were dealing with addicted family issues, but a lot of sexual abuse for sure, and a lot of physical and emotional abuse. And I think it's much more rampant in families today, partly because going back to what you said earlier about when you were talking about the holidays and the ideals, I think we still have a great desire to look good. We want our families to look good. We want to look good in our businesses and in our relationships. And we haven't yet, I feel we haven't, although I think we're moving in this direction, I think we haven't yet as a society given ourselves full permission to just be out there with the truth of sometimes how bad it can really be. Um, and again, not for blame and shame, but for the purpose of owning our truth and healing. So a lot of people have an ideal image of what their family is supposed to be, and they want the world to think that.
Right.
So that just adds to the denial.
They want the social media family.
Hmm.
Yeah. Do you think that it still is popular? I don't want to say popular, but do you think that it still is the sexual abuse in families? Do you think that it's decreased over the years, or do you think that it stayed this? Is common in families today as it was before?
I just don't have any way of knowing statistically what's true in terms of numbers. I just don't have any way to know that. But I think it's still really rampant. Let me just put it that way. Really, really rampant. I think media still objectifies women's bodies. I think there's a lot of very unhealthy messages about sex in our society. And I think there's a lot of healing going on. I think there's a lot of talking about it. And I still think there's a lot of denial around people who come forward and tell their stories. So I think it's all true. And I don't know numbers. There may be research that would show you numbers, but I don't have it.
I have to tell you, I hung on to that anger and that and the frustration and I kind of I feel like I wore it as like this not like a badge of honor, but a like a shield,
Yeah.
right? Um, but that was the reason, and I wore it proudly because I thought this shield of why I've distanced and disassociated myself from my family um, is why. And because my mother knew when it was happening when I was younger. It was my oldest brother, and then the neighbor's brother, which was an older gentleman. Those are the two people that abused me. But my mother knew about it, and this was when I was like 5, 6, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? She never said anything. Didn't ever do anything about it until I was like 15. And I remember driving down the highway, and my mom and my sister were in the front seat, and I was in the back seat, and something was brought up about it, right? And she blatantly said, "Well, that's no different than you and John, right?" my brother. I didn't even know she knew. And at that point in time, that's when child locks, when you could flip that switch so kids couldn't jump out or open the door. That's when those cars came out. I think God knew what he was doing with that one. But I pulled. I remember we were on the highway, right? I-15 in Salt Lake City and
Wow.
whatever it was. But I remember pulling on that door, and because if it would have opened, I would have jumped out of the car because I was so. I mean, the feeling were just. And then as the years went on, it's like, why did you not do anything? Why did you not do anything? Yeah, I had a really, really hard time with that for quite some time. Quite some time.
It's not an uncommon dynamic, and there's a lot of explanations for why that happens. I don't know if we want to go into them today, but there are a lot of ways to understand why that happens. It doesn't make it right. It certainly doesn't make it anything that's easy to digest if it was your own parent who didn't protect you and they knew that you were being hurt. But in a nutshell, what I can say quickly is that, that's one of the reasons why we had a group for what we call non-offending parents, because very often they were, now in your case, it was a child that was molesting you, not your mother's partner or her husband, but
he's like 5 years. I think he's like 3 years older than me.
Right. So part of it is shame and denial. Part of it is that often people have been trained, they've really learned that it is the victim's fault. He must have asked for it, or she liked it, or she should have screamed or stopped it or done something. And there's a lot of blame of victims that goes around. But I would say even the most common issue that we saw with the non-offending parent was that they had their own unresolved abuse, and they just froze in the face of witnessing abuse of their child. They just became helpless, and they explained it away the way they explained away their own abuse. And again, that doesn't make it right.
Yeah, it wasn't until recently I realized that my biological father died when I was I think I was like right around 3. I know that my younger brother and I are considered Irish twins. We're only like 18, 19 months apart. But he was just a baby. And so I was like 2.5, 3 years old. But my oldest brother, and he died when he was 27. We were really young kids, but my oldest brother looked so much like my father. And my mother struggled with that for a really long time. The death of my dad. And I know that she favored him over the rest of us, rest of us. And I think that it was because she looked at him in an unhealthy way, because it was like her husband.
Well, and that's really what we found most common among the non-offending mothers who didn't protect their children when they knew. It was because they were protecting the marriage.
Well, my dad had passed.
No, I know, but you're saying your brother kind of filled that
spot. My
spot.
brother looked like my father who had died, but they resembled. But she favored him, I think, because of that resemblance. And I think that had a lot to do with it, but it doesn't. It's not it's just. There's nothing on this planet that could ever make it okay. But I found peace with it because she, for whatever reason, that's just what she did, and we just have to accept where people are,
Right. Well, it's an odd thing to say everybody really is doing the best they know how to do, because on some level they are, and sometimes the best that they know how to do is really not good.
Right. I said to somebody the other day, I said, you know what? I don't think there's a single person in this world that gets up in the morning and said, man, I feel great. I'm as healthy as I could be. I'm just mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. I am just flying high, just so happy. I'm going to go out today in this world and I'm going to see how many people I can just mess up and just
Right,
screw with and really
right.
just destroy their lives, right? Nobody healthy does that. We
No,
just don't. So
we
when we
don't.
can grasp that and say, you know what, healthy people don't do unhealthy things,
Right,
it makes
exactly.
a huge difference. But then you don't go around the world and start saying, you're unhealthy, point the fingers at people.
No, but I think without being mean about it or pointing finger, I think that is what we need to do in the world today, to really know
But
that
we
the
need to do
people
it
who
within
are
ourselves so we can
right,
learn who we are from that, right?
right, right. And
If
then
this
to
unhealthy, if
know,
this person's unhealthy actions, I know it's unhealthy, it's triggered me. What's unhealthy within me to trigger it instead of having empathy,
right,
right?
yeah,
So let's see. One of the greatest things I think that you and I had in common is the spiritual aspect and understanding this is a spiritual journey. And something I was thinking is, how do you think that spirituality intersects with psychology? That there's, I mean, I can see a definite um, intertwining, through our mental
right.
processes. Um,
Well, I think one way of looking at it is that the healthier we are on an emotional level, the more we've healed our own wounds. And again, nobody does this perfectly or, forever. We're in a process. But the more we work on healing our own wounds, the less we're going to project onto our own unhealed wounds, our shadow side, onto other people. The more we're able to be loving or forgiving or make clear boundaries or stand up for ourselves in an appropriate way or make amends when needed. We're just able to do those things. And part of that is, I think the healthier a person becomes, the more they heal themselves or work on themselves or, work on their relationship skills, the less we tend to idealize other people. We know everybody's human. We know people are good and they have their blind spots. We know they have an essential self and they can sometimes act out of their wounds. And so we develop more of a sense of our own equality. And I believe that's what happens. But we develop more compassion because I know my own imperfection, like you were saying, and therefore I can feel more understanding of you when maybe you're not at your best self. And I can appreciate you when you are at your best self because I can appreciate myself when I'm at my best self. Um, so I think the more healing we're able to do on a psychological level, we bring that to our relationship to spirit. People who have been, for instance, and this is one example, and your listeners may or may not agree with me, but I think people who have had very punishing parents might be attracted to a very punishing idea of God. Sin and retribution, and you have to always, do better and flagellate and whatever because you're basically bad. If you got that message from your parents and none of that is healed, you might be attracted to that, a religion or a spiritual practice that perpetuates that. If you're if you basically grew up in a loving home or you healed enough to feel a lot of love for yourself and forgiveness for yourself and other people, you might be drawn to a more loving idea of what spirit and God is. And so I think uh, another way that that's really played out, and I saw this because I was in a lot of different spiritual groups when I was quite young, because I was attracted to spiritual practice and I wanted to grow in that way. But in hindsight, and even at the time, some of what I saw was that people were playing out their unhealed wounds all over the spiritual group. They were trying to be the special person or have more authority than others or put other people down or sleep with everybody's wife or whatever they were doing, because we take our unhealed wounds with us wherever we go and we take them into our religious and spiritual life as well. And sometimes then the reverse can happen, which is our connection to spirit can help us heal those wounds and we stop acting them out in that way. That's, that's sort of a very brief way that I would say that spirituality and psychology are interconnected.
So I think that this might be a repetitive question, but let me see. So, where do you find the connection between psychological and spiritual health and well-being, you know, in both personal growth and in growth as an evolving humanity or evolving human species? Because we see it all over in nature, but
Right,
but that's just it, you know, it's just the human aspect of it, because plants know what they're supposed to do,
right,
animals know what they're supposed to do, and it's like an automatic thing. We're the only ones with this evolved brain, right? And we're the ones that are screwing up the most. It's like
right.
God's probably
Well,
wondering, what did I do
think
there?
here, my opinion. This is just my opinion, and anyone else is free to disagree with this because not God, and I don't know everything. But my experience has shown me that psychological healing brings us to be a state of more and more loving and cooperative impulses with ourselves and other people. I've never seen somebody heal from childhood trauma or dysfunction and become less loving or less cooperative. I've just never seen it. So I think psychological healing takes us to being more loving, more compassionate, more forgiving, having better boundaries, being able to resolve conflict with less stress and with less harm. And I think spiritual practice does the same thing. I think it takes us to higher and higher states of love and awareness of what we're doing here on earth and connection to our soul. But all of that, to me, and in my experience, is more and more loving, more and more wise, um, may have different knowledge, but it's still based in love and care and brotherhood. That's what I see.
That's a really great answer. You guys have one more. This the final. This is
Okay?
the final thing that I have to say. This final word. Um, we're all here on this planet to, in my perspective, other people can agree, disagree, but I know we all have our own personal truth, right? But for me personally, I know that we're all here to create something of value. I think that we come into this world, the original sin that they say that we're born with is, I think it's a sin, yes, but it's not a sin that we created. It's a sin or something that is going on here that we came here to make a difference in, or to change within that dynamics that we're placed into when we're born. I think that there's a lot about when we're born, how we're born, the sex we're born, family we're born into, and the reason that we come here. It's all intricately and so precise, right? But we're all here to utilize this stuff and utilize that divine guidance and create something of value, um, changing, whatever we came here to change, right? We have this thing that we're we're wanting to change, but then I think we're also here to create something, um, because that's why humanity's here, is to create. To me, it's we need to create something of a positive means for ourselves, right? Like some musicians, play beautiful piano or create beautiful music, and it just lightens their soul. It just lights them up. It just makes their hearts sing. But in return, we also have to add value to others, right? And so music is one of those things that not only does it um, add tremendous value to the creator, but it also to the people who receive it, right? So knowing that, um, you know, and it has to have a lasting impact, of purpose and meaning for the world. Does that make sense? Right? So,
Yeah.
with that said, how would you describe what it is that you have done in your lifetime, I mean, I can already see it, but I want to know what you see within you, because I see such a beautiful soul. Um, but what is it? How would you describe what it is that you have created, and how it's changed you, and in the same time added value to the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a nutshell, and it probably could be a longer explanation, but just in the short term, I think that our essential self, and I think we all have an essential self, knows what its contribution is. And it doesn't have to be big. I don't have to be the world savior. I don't have to save the rainforest. That might be my mission, but it doesn't have to be. It might be my mission to clean up all the water on the earth, or it might be my mission to just be a really good parent, or to love animals, or to grow a beautiful garden, or play the piano. So it doesn't matter the scale of what our contribution is. And I think in our ego consciousness, we're really wrapped up in the scale of what our contribution is. But I believe that on an essential level, if you're manifesting what your soul came here to do, and that you've contacted that within your essential self, which I believe we can, then you are living your life purpose, and it is a contribution. And I think part of what we're here to learn is that everybody's contribution is a little different. And often we demand conformity when really what we want to do is celebrate that piece of our individuality in ourselves and in other people, and not compare ourselves to other people. Not is my contribution big enough, or too small, or too big, or too better or worse, but to just really be in our own truth of what we came here to do. Because I think that brings the greatest freedom, the greatest inner joy, and actually provides the greatest contribution.
What do you think that contribution is so far in your life?
What did I find that was in my life? Well, when I was really little, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I knew that. I don't know how I knew that, but I loved reading. I loved writing. And I just knew that that was my path. For some people, they come in knowing. For some people, they discover it later. And for some people, it's still a question mark. I feel blessed that I knew that I felt like my soul wanted me to share whatever I learned, and whatever the gold was in my life, through writing. And that has also become speaking, but writing is sort of the bottom line. And so I was always drawn to write, and I felt the greatest connection to my essential self in writing.
And that's how you express yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. This has been so wonderful, and I know that there's going to be a ton of people wanting to connect with you. So, how can they connect with you? Um, I
Yeah.
have your website address um, at Phyllis Leavitt. Is that how you say it, Leavitt?
It's actually Leavitt. Yeah,
Leavitt?
Leavitt. Yeah.
So I have phyllisleavitt.com. But is there any other way? Do you just send people to your website? Is that how you interact?
Yeah, that's the best way, because there's several places on my website where you can just contact me directly.
Okay.
And it will come to me in an email. But I'm happy to connect with anybody who wants to connect with me. I have some, my book is available from all the major booksellers, and I would really recommend people check it out. I've just created a course that goes along with my book that I'll be offering really soon. I mean, immediately. So it's a whole course of how you can apply this to my book in your own personal life. And I have some other free offerings that are available through contacting me on my website.
And so people can they obtain their book through your website, I'm assuming.
You can order it through my website, but and that's a totally fine way to do it. But my website will just take you to Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever, because that's basically where the books can be found.
Okay. I just want to thank you, Phyllis, and I know that we're going to have more conversations, because I know that something will bubble up inside of me and they're like, ooh, I know who to answer and I know who to call, because there's just been so much, and there's so much more we could have talked about and explored and really given to people. And I hope that today, the people that are watching, I really hope that the content in this podcast, I just feel that it was really enlightening. It was really positive. I think that I know it fed my soul, and it really makes me feel good. And we talked about a pretty heavy topic. Like, this
Right.
is really a heavy topic. It's a really tender, um, kind of a difficult thing, that to talk about, to share, to heal in every aspect that you look at it from, no matter, you know, what it, from whatever direction. But I think that we really think that this was such a powerful,
Mm.
powerful podcast, I think, and I'm pleased with it. I'm really pleased with this conversation.
Well, thank you so
I'm
much
really
for
pleased with
having
it.
me and for being such a, contributor yourself. I really appreciate you and thank you for having me here.
Well, thank you so much, and I guess we'll talk again soon.
Okay,
Take care.
great. And you take care. Be well.
Bye
Bye.
bye.